Politics is inherently complicated as it tries to meet the needs of millions of individuals, all with different priorities. But since liberal democracy has become the main political system in Europe, it's been common to see individuals and movements propose themselves as the real representatives of people, in contrast with the so-called political elite, which only pursues self-interests. Usually these movements tend to embrace radical views on society from the far right or left. Hello, I'm Mirko Paradiso and today we'll discuss populism in Europe, eyeing the next European elections of 2024, concerning polls around the EU and a possible comeback of Donald Trump as a candidate in the American presidential elections in 2024. We probably need to get to understand populism a bit better, and radical right and left and how they work in the EU. Don't forget to subscribe to check our videos. Let's dive into it. First of all, we need to understand what populism is and how a populist leader is different from an extreme right-wing leader. If we were to oversimplify, populism, in a nutshell, tends to divide society into two groups, often identified with the people and the elite. The people are considered a homogeneous morally good force, while the elite is a pejorative term to describe an opposite group that works against the interests of the people. Take Donald Trump, a right-wing populist leader. Since the beginning of his political campaign in 2016, has always referred to the Americans as the people and the elite, like the deep state or the mainstream media, as their enemies. The same strategy used by the new elected president of Argentina, Javier Milei. Now, it's also important to know that populism is not exclusive to a specific political area and can be merged with other ideologies.
So, first of all, the majority of the populist parties in Europe are populist radical right parties. Nevertheless, there also are populist parties which are left-wing. We have a few examples: Syriza in Greece, right, or Podemos in Spain. They are the minority, but they also exist. Modern populism is much more present in Europe than the US. The difference is that in countries which are presidentialist parties like the US, the figure of the leader is much more visible. The president of the United States obviously has much more visibility than the prime minister of Italy or France.
So a populist movement can be right-wing, left-wing, liberal, nationalistic or religious. Populism is not exclusive to radical movements, even though its divisive nature probably helps better political formations that have more polarizing stances. In the European Union today, leaders from different political parties can be classified as populist. Viktor Orban, Giorgia Meloni and Robert Fico, if we want to name some prime ministers. But also more moderate and centrist leaders could be encompassed into this category. But what do all these populist leaders have in common? Where does populism in the EU come from and what does it feed on?
We saw the emergence of the populist radical left after the Great Recession crisis of 2010 and the debt crisis that hit harshly mainly the southern European countries like Greece, like Italy, like Spain and Portugal. Depending on the type of the crisis, the political opportunity structures open for different kinds of populism. So migration, we would expect that we have basically the emergence or the electoral strengthening of the populist radical right, while economic crises tend to emerge or rise of the populist radical left.
Economic resentment and immigration have been fueling the populist movements in the EU since 2008, so it's not unlikely that these movements will get stronger if Europe is hit with a recession or a large wave of migration in the near future. But is the EU exposed to a new wave of populism? We already know that about a third of the seats in the European Parliament are occupied by parties and movements that can be defined as populist or somehow radical. At the national level right now, the three major EU countries have polls showing that radical right-wing populism is stronger than ever. In Germany, Alternative for Deutschland might be now the second party in the country, and a new extreme left populist formation led by Sarah Wagenknecht is also on the rise. In France and Italy, Le Pen's Rassemblement National and the governing Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia are the first parties. The far right in the EU started gaining traction a few years ago, and in the future it could gain even more relevance and get some more important seats in the EU's leadership.
So the majority of populist parties in Europe are right-wing populists, radical right-wing populists. I'd say that populist radical right parties basically tend to profit from migrant crisis. Why? Because they're basically nativists. It means that they want to protect the cultural homogeneity of the nation, this cultural fear that feeds upon the populist radical right. And we say this is the main crisis the populist radical right profit from.
Populism and radical politics can be traced to democracy due to the same nature of democracy of being tolerant with the intolerance, allowing the elections of leaders that aim to the destruction of democracy, as Professor Manucci told us. So with the possible expansions of radical formations and populism in the future, what can policymakers do today to prevent further extremization and better meet the needs of the people? Between the two world wars, many populist and radical right-wing movements took the lead in many European countries, including Italy and Germany, as we know. The main cause of these changes of regimes was deep economic and political instability, to which fascism seemed to be a solution back then. According to the historian Eric Hobsbawm, if these instabilities didn't reappear later in history in Europe, this is because a larger welfare state was introduced after World War II to better protect citizens. Also, new groups of people were allowed into political scene with the universal right to vote, new institutions were created, and ultimately European integration paved the way for more political and economic stability. In the end, democracy was reinforced, and this created the longest period of stability in the history of the continent. So a solution to populism and radical politics might be to better listen to the needs of the people.
In my opinion, it's a problem of representation, of how leaders not represent well the interest of the people. And it is true that the distance from the people, between the people and the elite has grown over the years. And the elite has become this sort of untouchable entity with which people cannot communicate with. Right. So in my opinion, a better representation, more fluid conversation and feedback between the people and those who are in charge. I believe that populism is not essentially bad per se, but populism can become a disruptive force for democracy. I think we need a different way of doing politics.
Societies are infinitely more complex than a dualism between people and the elite, as we know. But in a time where liberal democracy is being questioned from all fronts, paraphrasing the political theorist Robert Dahl, a transformation of democracy and its success could be a new reference for all those who believe in democracy as the best form of government. I'm Mirko Paradiso. Go check youractive.com if you want to find out more.